In this podcast, two Gen Xers are taking a trip down memory lane, revisiting and reflecting on the cinema of the 1980s. We'll look at the hits and the flops, the studio blockbusters and art house indies, the critically acclaimed, and the universally reviled. The series is hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli, a writer and librarian, and features Dustin Morrow, a filmmaker, author, and professor of film. So pull on your legwarmers, crank up your boombox, and hop in the DeLorean. It's time for the long rewind. Hello and welcome to the long rewind. I'm Lisa and with me is Dustin, and we are talking today about the films of the first half of 1982. How's it going, Dustin?
I'm good. Why don't you start us off, as always, with a look at what was going on in the world in 1982. Give us a little context.
Great. So here's a little context of world news for 1982. The Falklands War began on April 2nd, and that was the conflict between Argentina and the United Kingdom over the Falkland Islands. Argentina invaded the islands, which led to a military response from the UK. The war lasted for 74 days and ended with the British recapturing the islands. There was also the Lebanon War, also happened in 1982. Israel launched a military operation in Lebanon on June 6th, 1982, in response to ongoing attacks by Palestinian groups based in Lebanon. The war resulted in Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon and lasted until 2000. So a lot of war in 1982 looks like. In more pop culture, we have Michael Jackson's Thriller album that was released on November 30th, 1982, and that was a really big deal. It became one of the best-selling albums of all time, spawning multiple hit singles and solidifying Jackson's status as a pop music icon.
That was the first long play LP that I ever got.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're probably not alone in that in terms of kids of the 80s.
I remember it opened up, like it had a gatefold, and it had like just a big picture of Michael lying on his side.
Yeah.
And, that was the cover. But then when you opened it up, you could see his arm and where his sleeve ended. Like there was a couple inches of his wrist between his sleeve and his hand, and you could see his veins popping out more than I've ever seen anyone's veins. This was like weirdly a discussion on my my grade school playground, is like what was going on with Michael's blood.
So it didn't only affect you. You weren't the only person who noticed this. You guys talked about this on the playground.
In fact, I bet, well, maybe I'm crazy, but I bet if you Googled it, something might come up. Like it was just a weird thing going around. And
if it struck you and your classmates, I suspect it
struck others
too. Yeah. That's interesting. Okay, well, also in music news, Prince released his breakthrough album 1999, featuring popular tracks like 1999 and Little Red Corvette, another fantastic album that came out of 1982.
I also had a cassette of that when I was young and did not get any of the innuendos that I got later on when I was older.
Right, well, that's probably for the best. Prince, at least at that time, was well known.
I remember my babysitter being weirdly uncomfortable with me playing that tape and not understanding why, really.
Yeah, well, probably for the best that you didn't get it at the time.
Yeah.
In TV news, we have Cheers, the popular sitcom set in a Boston bar. It premiered in 1982 and went on to become one of the most beloved TV shows of the decade. So some really big pop cultural things coming out of 1982.
What I know about Cheers that's interesting is that it was a total failure in its first, few seasons.
Was it really?
Yeah, in its first season, it was ranked close to dead last, in the 80s. And by the end, obviously, it was number one.
Yeah,
going off the air, but it was it tanked in the beginning, and the network just believed in it, thought it was a good show, and gave it time to grow. That's something that would obviously never happen today.
Yeah, I mean, everybody take note. It's really important to give things time, and that's how things become great. I mean, Cheers, that's so interesting. I didn't know that because Cheers, as you and I came to know it later, it was basically the gold standard, biggest sitcom of all time, and maybe still is.
Yeah, it's still one of my favorite. Yeah, it's just like
it holds up.
It's like a warm blanket, that show, when you watch it. Like you put it on late at night. It's just comfort TV.
But it's also so well written. I mean, it holds up, I think, in a lot of ways. Also, perhaps in the less holding up category, but still great, Knight Rider, which was a show featuring a talking car named Kit, debuted, and that starred everyone's favorite, David Hasselhoff. So that was Knight Rider. I was a big fan of Knight Rider back in the day. I remember being really excited when I was allowed to watch it. So I was really into Knight Rider. I don't know about you, but
Yeah, I loved it. It's
yeah, had a talking car. I mean, come
yeah,
on.
it's now you try to watch it.
Yeah.
It's some of those shows I still really enjoy for their
Kitsch
pitch value, but
value for
that's not.
remembering the good old days, that kind of thing. Yeah, Cheers, it's not like Cheers at all. Cheers still holds up. It's still a quality piece of entertainment. Knight Rider is entertaining, but mostly for nostalgia
But I would also
and
say like Knight
reasons.
Rider is not still watchable. Like
No.
I still find like the A-Team or MacGyver kind of watchable.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Knight
definitely.
Rider's just slow and dumb.
Well, yeah. Also in TV, Saint Elsewhere, a medical drama series, premiered and gained critical acclaim during its run. That was a show I did not watch. I was way too young for it. It seemed like a very like grown up show to me, so I never watched.
I think that
Saint
show
Elsewhere.
introduced Denzel Washington to the world. He was a
maybe some
regular
other
on that
people
show
too,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
I think it launched a lot of people.
I remember my parents watching it, but
Yeah.
it was obviously too adult for us.
It was totally a show that parents would watch,
Yeah.
and I ignored it. And then, of course, Namco introduced the iconic arcade game Pac-Man, which became a cultural phenomenon and is still recognized today. I think pretty much anyone listening to this, even your kids, probably
Yeah.
would recognize.
Do you remember the
Pac-Man.
Pac-Man cartoon?
I do, to some degree. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was. I remember. I don't know what
He had a
year-
top hat for some reason.
He had a top hat. I did not
Yeah.
remember that. That's funny. I like that he had
Or
a top
like a
hat.
derby. I think
Some
he
kind
also
of hat.
wore a tie. I don't know. It was very.
Oh.
I don't know what the deal with it was.
I-
There were a lot of video game cartoons. In
I
the
was just
80s. There
gonna
was a
say-
Q*bert cartoon.
Yeah. One thing I do remember, there was, I don't know, I'm sure you remember this. One of the most exciting things for me was every fall around the time of like right before school was starting or right around when it was starting, they would do these reveals of the September Saturday morning cartoon lineup. And there would usually be a little preview show that went along with that aired on like Friday night or something like that. And one I remember specifically was Scott Baio hosted it, I think. And it was all about the lineup of these arcade game themed Saturday morning cartoons like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong and I think Frogger and what else? I don't know. There were a lot of them. Q*bert. Yeah.
Well, pre-internet, when you're a little kid,
Yeah.
you lived for those primetime specials that would
Oh, yeah.
announce like what the new fall cartoons were going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember those every year. Like
It's
Keisha
really
Knight
exciting.
Pulliam hosted one year.
Yeah.
And I think Soleil Moon Frye hosted one year.
Whoever was like big on TV,
Yeah.
basically the kid who was
Yeah.
big on TV would usually host it. Yeah, I remember that really well. And I just remember being really excited every year when I don't know if each network had one or what, but anyway, I remember.
You can find a lot of those on
Yeah.
YouTube now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's TV news and film.
I'll take film.
Okay, yeah, you go ahead and take film.
So I'll just run through quick some of the big events that were happening in cinema in 1982. E.T. came out, obviously, became the highest grossing film ever made at that point and held on to that title until I think Titanic, around 96 or 97 or 97, I think, is when Titanic came out. Michelle Pfeiffer had her first leading role in Grease 2, which is a movie we'll discuss, I'm sure, at some point.
Yep.
Coca-Cola purchased Columbia Pictures for $750 million.
Wow.
Tron came out and was the first feature film to extensively use computer animation.
Yes.
Twilight Zone, the movie, came out. That was notable mostly for the death of Vic Morrow, no relation, and two child actors who were accidentally killed during a helicopter action scene. And that led to a lot of reforms in filmmaking safety and in child labor. And it also kind of permanently cast a cloud over the career of the extremely successful director John Landis. There are a lot of people who, to this day, believe that he really ought to be in prison. But he was acquitted along with the producers of that film. Was not held accountable for those deaths, but there's a lot of controversy in the industry over what happened on that set. First Blood also came out and launched the Rambo franchise. I'm sure we'll talk about First Blood. Eddie Murphy made his film debut in 48 Hours. Eddie was really hot coming off of SNL, so his film debut was a big deal, and he picked the right picture to do it. 48 Hours was a big hit and beloved critically. Tootsie came out, and it became the highest grossing comedy ever made, which is something I think at that point, which is something people kind of forget about. If it's remembered at all today, it's mostly for its sort of like political story, the politics of that story, especially in today where there's so much focus on gender politics and gender identity and that kind of thing. Tootsie would not be a film that could even be made today, but the reaction to its release would probably be very different if it were to come out today.
Well, and politics aside, it's just a reminder of how big comedies were back then, because it is a comedy.
Yeah.
So, big.
And finally, the THX sound system. That was the sound system developed by George Lucas, named after his big student film THX 11. What is the name of that movie? It's THX like 1138 or 11. I'm blanking. Anyway, it was a surround sound system developed for movie theaters, still commonly in use today.
Yeah, I think you still see the logo pop up.
Yeah.
Some films.
All right, so let's get into the first half of 1982. So what were the key films that you thought came out in that year?
Well, in the first half of the year, since that's what we're talking about today, I have Annie, which is, I don't know if it's just a beloved film of you and I, so I don't know, maybe it's not key.
Yeah, I kind of put it under unsung gems because it flopped and it was critically reviled, and I still think it's one of the great musicals that Hollywood
really well
ever
done.
made.
It's
I
a
really
great
think
musical.
It's phenomenal. John Huston, I think, directed the hell out of it. The super fun, super expensive looking,
very
big
expensive looking
scale musical. I love Albert Finney in it and Ryan King.
I mean, come on,
yeah. It's got some politically incorrect stuff that wouldn't fly today, but it's just such a fun movie, and I think if you were a kid in the 80s, you probably also loved it. It was. I don't know anybody who didn't. Who was
well, and
kid.
maybe that's why I might consider it a slightly key film, just because I was obsessed with that, the musical and the movie. I wanted to be Annie. Essentially, I performed all the songs in our living room. So I think I had the lunchbox too, and as you're saying, I think I probably was not alone at all in that. I think it was pretty big for a lot of kids. So Annie was maybe a big deal in that way, if not in the industry for sure. It was a bit of a flop. I have Rocky 3 on here. That seemed like, the Rocky franchise is really big.
Yeah, and that one in particular, like Rocky was big, Rocky 2 was big, but Rocky 3 was massive. And even stylistically, it did something that no movie had really done to that extent before, which was that it had all these music video sequences.
Oh, yeah.
And by some film nerds, it's considered to be like the first 80s music video movie.
Remind us a little about which Rocky 3 is.
Oh, Rocky 3 is the one where he fights Mr. T.
Okay.
Like those movies are defined by who he fights at the end, right? And so Rocky 3 is the Clubber Lang Mr. T one. He also comes up against Hulk Hogan about halfway through. If you want to dispute the 80s-ness of Rocky 3,
it's quite
there's a little support for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hulk Hogan plays a character named, get this, Thunderlips.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
I remember Mr. T, but
it was like the height of Hulkamania.
Oh man, that's super 80s.
It was big.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the favorite Rocky of a lot of fans. And it doesn't have the gravitas of like the first one, certainly, or the second one, really. It's the point where the Rocky movies start to turn a little cartoonish, and then in 4 go obviously full cartoon. But we'll talk about 4 later in this podcast.
It's interesting to think about that. I feel like maybe the Rocky franchise from first to latest, there's sort of a curve there where they kind of get cartoonish and then they kind of go back to more, I don't know, grave or not grave, but serious or whatever. I also had Poltergeist.
Yeah.
It's a movie I really like, but maybe you can tell the folks about why Poltergeist might be a key film.
I mean, I don't know that it's important at all, other than it's just a really great PG horror movie. I think it's a good, like, it's like a good my first horror movie. Like if you wanted
Which
to
is
show,
something I can still
I wouldn't
appreciate
show it
today,
to a little kid, but you could show it to, you could certainly show it to like a tween.
Yeah.
And you know, it's PG and it's not bloody, but it does have some really just great scary stuff in it, and it's got great effects. And I mean, the big story that's always circled around Poltergeist is whether it was actually directed by its director, Tobe Hooper, who came off of Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh, wow.
Poltergeist is such a wildly different movie from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And Steven Spielberg was the producer, and he's there on the set. And the movie just feels like a Spielberg movie.
Yeah.
Like aesthetically, thematically, the characters, like everything about it feels very Spielbergian. So there's been this myth that's been floating around Hollywood forever that Spielberg's actually the director of Poltergeist, but that's been disputed by people that were there and on the set. So
that is really interesting because, as you know, I had a pretty hard time watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I totally respect it as what it is, but that was a hard one for me. Whereas I actually really like Poltergeist, and I'll watch it again and again. It's I'm
small note. One of the few good horror movie remakes also.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely love the remake of
in
Poltergeist.
large part because of Sam
Rockwell. Yeah, he's great in it. Although all the actors in that are really good. But yeah, I like that about Poltergeist too. I think it's actually just a really solid, good story, and both have really good actors in it.
Yep.
So it's a great movie. E.T. I mean, that's a key film of 1982 for many reasons.
So obviously it's hard to describe what a big deal it was to people that weren't around when it came out. I mean, it dominated every aspect of pop culture. It was just...
Even candy.
Yeah, candy, toys, books, magazines, TV. It was just everywhere.
Fast food.
Yeah. And Spielberg kept it off of home media for many years. I don't remember what year it actually came out on VHS, but it was like I was well into high school before it came out. And it was just it would re-release every couple of years, and it was just such a big deal. What's amazing to me, and I know you and I have talked about this a lot, and we'll probably continue to mention this, is that I think it's interesting when you look at the 80s, and I think about how much I love the films of that decade. I'm often blown away by how close together some of them come out. And every once in a while, there'll be like a weekend where there'll be like 5 movies, and you're like, good God, all 5 of these movies are classics. And that's just like something that, I know things are different. I know nostalgia is a lens. I know,
absolutely.
But I would even say, like, if you go back and look at some of these weekends in the 80s and look at like the weekends where 5 good movies will come out, those 5 movies are like objective classics, not subjective classics.
That a lot of people consider.
And so just so you know,
classic. Yeah.
This is a good example. On the same day, E.T., Blade Runner, and The Thing came out. 3 of the greatest movies ever made, period.
Let alone great science fiction movies, but great movies.
Yeah, 3 great science fiction movies. So, of course, the story of that weekend is that E.T., in some ways killed those movies. Those movies were killed by other things, too. Blade Runner of course, came out in a wildly different form than you can see it
Right.
now. It was shorter. It was edited different. There was like this bad voiceover narration on it, and the ending was different, and it was just not really Ridley Scott's vision. That it still became a classic even long before he was able to recut it and re-release it shows you just how amazing looking it was, if nothing else.
Yeah.
And The Thing just got clobbered by critics. Critics said it was like the worst movie ever. It was
I love The Thing.
just
The Thing is
hated
so great.
when it
I'm
came out.
surprised. What did they hate about it? Do you know?
They just said it was disgusting.
Well,
I think the
okay, that's
effects were
true.
too much for. I mean, it's
Yeah.
hard to imagine nowadays when you see grosser stuff on
Yeah.
any TV show. But
Yeah.
for the time, it was just the effects are quite visceral.
They are
Very. And I think it just had think about when it came out. It was like early 80s. We were, by 82, we were just getting into the full throes of Reaganism, where it was morning in America and it was all optimism.
Yeah.
And the economy was starting to blow up. And
The Thing is dark.
yeah. And E.T. came out in the same weekend, right? And E.T.
Right.
gives you this like optimistic, gentle, friendly, heartwarming version of aliens. And then there's John Carpenter over here going, no, let's think about this nihilistically, pessimistically, cynically,
paranoid. Yeah,
paranoia.
Right.
So it was just it was not the right weekend for that movie to come out. That movie bombed so bad that it actually derailed Carpenter's career for a little while. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I realized that. I'm one who does not really like gross in movies, but that's a great movie. It's so good.
Yeah.
I recommend it.
And again, just what a weekend. Can you imagine going to the movie theater and like you've never seen any of those movies and you look up at the marquee and it's E.T., Blade Runner, and The Thing.
Yeah. Well, we wouldn't have known it at the time.
You wouldn't have known
man.
at the time, but it's just wild.
The three titans.
So I have a few
please.
movies that that caught my eye when I was looking at the list of what came out in the first half of the year. Conan the Barbarian, which is the real movie that really made Arnold Schwarzenegger a star. I mean, The Terminator solidified that, but Conan came out first. And he had done a couple small parts, and he had one starring role in a movie that was truly terrible that nobody saw called Hercules in New York. But Conan was the movie that really put Arnold on the map.
Yeah.
And it holds up. It's a great movie. It's a controversial movie in some ways because John Milius is such a kind of a right-wing nut, and there are elements of those politics in that movie, but it's just a great adaptation of those books. You're gonna laugh at me when I mention this, but I'll tell you why I think it's a key film. Death Wish 2.
I knew we were gonna be talking about Death Wish 2.
Only because it was the first big release from Canon Films after Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus took it over. And Canon Films became like the dominant releaser of production company of like kind of B grade action movies. And I'm sure we'll be talking about Canon. We should probably do a whole episode on Canon.
That's probably
because
a good
they're that
idea,
interesting.
Yeah. I was going to have you explain Canon a little more to folks, but they probably deserve
I mean, how long you got, right? I'm kind of obsessed with Canon, so we'll do a Canon episode at some point because their story is so incredibly fascinating. But if Death Wish 2 had not been a big hit, we might not have had the Canon that we got. Had the the success that they had. It was just a big movie for them.
Maybe explain to the people also what Death Wish is.
Oh, Death Wish was a movie that came out in the early 70s with Charles Bronson as a pacifist whose wife is assaulted and murdered, and he becomes a vigilante essentially. And it was released at a time that New York was really a toilet. It was
burning.
Terrible crime. And it just tapped into, kind of a bloodthirsty desire for justice among people that were
Vigilantism.
tired
Yeah,
of,
absolutely.
you know, the lack of services and the lack of support
Yep.
and in the cities. And it's a serious film. If you go back and watch the original Death Wish, you might, and you've never seen it, you might be surprised by what you find it to be. It's not what it became by Death Wish 3, which is its own weird work of genius, which I'm sure we'll talk about
No
later in
doubt.
this podcast.
You know Death Wish really well. I do not.
But Death Wish
yeah.
3 is like a world apart from the
Mm.
original Death Wish. But anyway, more on that later as we get deeper into the 80s.
Yeah.
Other movies that caught my eye here, Das Boot,
Yep.
because it really
had that.
it put Wolfgang Petersen on the map as a director, and he went on to make a ton of huge hits. German filmmaker who went on to make a movie I love called The Never-Ending Story, but
Oh,
also a bunch of
interesting.
hit movies like In the Line of Fire, and I think he did Air Force One,
Oh, yeah.
and The Perfect Storm. He did a lot of stuff.
So what is Das Boot about?
Das Boot is a submarine movie. It's a German
Okay,
submarine
that's what I
movie.
thought. Yeah.
Das
Yeah.
Boot, of course, means the boat. There's one really, I don't remember a lot about it. It's been forever since I've seen it, but there's one great scene I remember where they're being pursued and they're forced to take their sub. It's a World War II movie. It's kind of a rickety sub to begin with, and they're forced to take it deeper than it's supposed to go. And they're like being really quiet, and you can just feel the way the sound design is done. You can feel the pressure on the sub. You can feel the metal starting to give, and then like bolts start to shoot out. Yeah. It's pretty wild.
Ooh. I wonder, is that because submarine movies become kind of a thing as the 80s progress into the 90s? Is this kind of the first of its kind, or were there submarine?
Well, no,
movies
there were
before?
submarine movies
there were a
going
lot of
back to
submarine
like
movies.
Run Silent, Run Deep. There's a lot of like classic submarine movies.
Okay.
Yeah. Diner came out.
Yep.
It's Barry Levinson's
had that on my
Baltimore
list.
comedy, mostly notable for introducing a lot of young actors that would go on to be
Right.
bigger, like Kevin Bacon and Daniel Stern. Richard Pryor Live on the Sunset Strip, which this was back in the day when they would put out these comedy concerts in theaters.
Yep.
For people who could not get to cities where they might be playing, and some of them were hits. Richard Pryor had a few. Eddie Murphy's Delirious and Raw were both hits.
Yep.
So there were some of these. The Sunset Strip one is just a great performance by Richard Pryor, and it's the first concert he did after his big freebasing accident where he set himself on fire. So there's
he tells the whole story. I think,
and
right?
you know, if you're a student of stand-up and really like stand-up, it's a movie you should see because, you know, Richard Pryor is considered by most to be the greatest stand-up of all time, and it's one of his great performances. Porky's came out in the first half.
I had that.
It's a terrible movie, but it was a huge hit, and it helped to launch the teen sexploitation genre, which was
that was huge.
Really big in the 80s, and produced almost zero actual good movies. So thanks a lot, Porky's. Notable also maybe for bringing us Kim Cattrall for the first time.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, there it is.
Fitzcarraldo came out that's a Werner Herzog movie.
Oh.
The making of that movie is called Burden of Dreams. It's almost a more interesting movie than Fitzcarraldo, because it had just an unbelievably troubled production. It's the movie where famously Herzog was to have pulled a gun on his leading actor, Klaus Kinski, and forced him to act at gunpoint, because Klaus Kinski was also crazy like Herzog. He was even crazier than Herzog.
He was hard to rein in, as my understanding.
Yeah, he was nuts.
Yeah.
And nobody who ever worked with him liked him. In fact, Herzog made a great documentary about Kinski and their relationship called My Best Fiend, which is a really amusing movie. It's also, Fitzcarraldo is also famous as the movie where it's about a guy who at one point moves a giant steamboat over a mountain in the Amazon.
Whoa.
He's trying to move it from one river to another. And Herzog decided to just actually do this instead of
idea.
like doing it through miniatures or any kind of visual effects or even through cutaways where you would just see part of the ship. No, he
Oh
built the
my.
entire thing and just actually did it. And so you see
Whoa.
that in Burden of Dreams too, where he's like, and so he's just hired all of these indigenous people in the
Yeah.
Amazon and he essentially kind of becomes the character in the film, who is a
Wow.
guy who was driven to madness by this quest to move this ship and bring culture into the rainforest.
Burden of Dreams indeed.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
wild.
Wow.
And the other one I had was Star Trek 2.
Yep.
Only because it's probably the best Star Trek movie.
Remind us which Star Trek movie
It's
this
the
is.
Khan one. It's called The
Yep.
Wrath of Khan is the subtitle. It's Ricardo Montalban.
Yep.
And he's reprising a character that he played in the in a series and has a big beef, shall we say, with Kirk.
Yep.
And just a great action movie and a great science fiction movie. Man, what a great year for sci-fi, huh? This is only the first half of the year, and we're already talking about Star Trek 2, E.T., Blade Runner, The Thing. Just some great stuff.
It's the beginning. It's starting.
Yeah. What did you have under Unsung Gems? Did you have any movies you want to point people toward?
Well, we're both big Monty Python fans, and in that same vein of comedy being seen on the big screen in a way you don't really see it today, Monty Python Live at the Hollywood Bowl is something I love. It makes me laugh so hard. I love that piece. I actually didn't see that on the big screen. I saw it later, and I didn't realize it showed on the big screen. So that's the big one for me. There's a hidden gem in here that I think you should really speak to, and that's Grease 2. I think it's time for you to talk about Grease 2.
Well, it depends on who you're talking to, right?
Yeah.
I'm not alone in finding Grease 2 more enjoyable than Grease, and I love Grease, but I love Grease 2 a little more. It was on HBO a lot, so I saw it a lot as a kid. Like everybody else who saw it, I fell in love with Michelle Pfeiffer. And I just think the songs are great. I think the choreography it's directed by a choreographer.
Yeah.
The film's actually directed by the choreographer. And so in some ways, the way the film is shot really emphasizes the choreography in a way that you don't see in most musicals.
Yeah.
It is what it is. Like, I'm not alone in that evaluation. If you do a quick Google search for is Grease 2 better than Grease, you will find many hundreds, if not like thousands of people that hold that belief. But yeah, it's just a super fun movie that I've seen more times than I could count. I could probably recite it.
You brought me to Grease too. I hadn't, as someone who didn't have cable or HBO or anything growing up for a really long time. I'd heard about Grease too because you couldn't not hear about it, but I didn't really know it. And so it's super fun. So many great numbers that we watch over and over again. So I just thought you'd want to give some love to
I actually
Grease
saw
too.
it in the theater at a birthday party.
You did?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then
okay.
did not like at all get also any of the innuendos which fly fast and furious throughout.
Yeah, they're heavy,
Grease
thick
2.
and heavy in Grease too. That's for sure. Sometimes not even really innuendo, but yeah.
Yeah.
I also we watched this movie. I don't remember it super well. I remember the original better, but I put Cat People here. I loved the original. The original black and white I like a lot. I don't remember the 80s one, but maybe you can talk about Cat People a little bit.
Yeah, it's a Paul Schrader remake of the old black and white thriller about a woman who turns into a Black Panther when she is aroused, which sounds horrible as a pitch, but is done in a really peculiar and interesting way. I mean, it's just it's shot very, very interesting and it's extremely 80s.
Yeah.
It's David Bowie music.
Yeah,
Natasha Kinski plays the lead.
Yeah, pretty stylish. I think. Yeah,
it's just a wild movie. You'll know in 10 minutes if you're gonna hate it or love it.
Well, like I said, shout out to the black and white.
Is what it is.
The black and white originals.
Yeah,
pretty fabulous.
It's not as good as the original, but the original is pretty fun.
Really
and
great,
it's very if you like Paul Schrader, it's very Paul Schrader.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe you have some that
I had some. Yeah. I mean, Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid is a really fun movie where Steve Martin plays a detective in the 40s, and it's shot in black and white, and they intercut him with clips from famous stars seamlessly.
Right.
So
I've
it
never
seems
seen
like
this.
the whole movie he's interacting with Barbara Stanwyck and Humphrey Bogart and
Nice.
all these famous actors, and it's pretty fun. Death Trap was an adaptation of a play, a murder mystery, and the film version stars Michael Caine and Christopher Reeve.
Oh, that's a wonderful movie.
Yeah, that's a really
very
fun,
good.
clever movie.
Very clever.
Yeah, Diva, which is a French film. It was like one of the premier films of what was called the Cinéma du Look, which was a French movement of directors that favored style over substance and spectacle over narrative. All those movies had really slick, gorgeous visual styles. They were always about like doomed love affairs and young people that were trying to evade the authorities, and Diva is like one of the key films of that movement.
I didn't know Cinema Do Look. I should see some of these. That
Yeah,
sounds
you
like
would
a lot of
you
fun.
would actually probably like it. They're
Yeah,
kind
that's
of
what it
like
sounds
they're
like
kind of neo-noirish.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, a lot of them are set in like the metro, like the subway system.
Yeah.
One of them is actually called Subway.
So good.
Yeah, they tend to be a little overlong for as light as on narrative as they are, but they're like really amazing to look at.
Cool.
I think Luc Besson kind of came out of that. If you know what his movies look like.
Remind us of some Luc Besson movies.
Oh, he did The Professional, and
yeah.
The Fifth Element.
Oh, right.
And,
Yes.
And
Okay.
La Femme Nikita.
Yep.
Yeah. And the other one I had under Insect Gems, and I thought about putting this down under the sort of like B movie / so bad it's good list, but I said no, it's better than that, and it should be recognized for being better than that.
Yeah.
It's a movie called Vice Squad.
Oh, I assumed you would be bringing up Vice Squad. Tell the people
I love
about Vice Squad. Yeah.
Vice Squad is one of the sleaziest, grungiest action thrillers of that decade. You'll feel like you need to take a shower after you watch it.
I can't even watch this movie. I've seen the trailer. I can't,
it's really scummy. It has one of the greatest trailers ever.
It does have a good
even if you
trailer.
have no interest in watching Vice Squad after I tell you what it's about, you should still go to YouTube and watch the trailer because the trailer is just bananas.
Bonkers. Yeah.
Yeah, it's set on the streets of Hollywood at its like scuzziest in the early 80s, and it's set all in one night, and it's about a prostitute who can finger this pimp and put him away, so he's trying to find her and kill her, and the cop that's trying to find her in order to protect her. And so they're both, the cop and the killer pimp are pursuing this prostitute through the streets of Hollywood through all these sort of crazy adventures, and it just does not relent. It's like getting on a train with no conductor, like just an out of control roller coaster from beginning to end. And it's and it is, because of its subject matter, undoubtedly a B movie.
Yep.
But it's so well made that I think it kind of transcends its B moviness, and so I have no trouble recommending it to people who hear that premise and think they can take it.
I know that I can't, but I can respect.
Yeah, that's fair.
All the things about it. Wings Hauser he plays.
Wings Hauser gives one of the great villain performances of all time.
Pimp, right?
He plays the pimp as it's not what you would picture. He looks like a cowboy.
He does.
He's dressed like a cowboy
in the trailer. Yeah.
His character's name is Ramrod, and that's a good name for that character.
He seems really unhinged from the trailer.
It's one of
really
those
unhinged
performances that you're sort of like, makes you wonder if the actor is okay.
Yeah.
It's one of those performances where you're like, is that really a performance? Like, can anybody be that good in that kind of part who isn't maybe a little crazy themselves? And he's so good in it, in fact, that it kind of gave him a reputation, I think, in the industry as being kind of he has this kind of rep as like a Gary Busey or, or a Rip Torn, as kind of a slightly unhinged actor, and you have to know what you're going to get. And I think a lot of it came from that movie. I do, however, have some B movies to
Yes,
list.
there are. I saw some myself.
Yeah, some sort of so bad they're good. Swamp Thing,
Yep.
Wes Craven's comic
Yep.
book adaptation of Swamp Thing with
Yep.
Adrian Barbeau,
Yep.
which he edited to look like a comic book. Like it has all of these sort of like comic book panels and stuff that show up, and it's super fun.
Mm-hmm.
The Sword and the Sorcerer,
Mm-hmm.
which is a swords and swords and sandals action movie that came out just before Conan and ended up for like a fraction of Conan's budget, but ended up making a lot of money on the back of Conan.
Right.
And it cost about $5 to make, but it's just very imaginative. There's a lot of creativity and sort of fun to be had in it. There's a great B movie called Forbidden World. That's a Roger Corman science fiction movie.
Okay.
Yeah, I won't go into it.
Okay.
There's
I don't know a lot about it.
People that know will know it.
Okay.
Visiting Hours, which is a Canadian slasher. It's one of the better slashers from the 80s. It's Michael Ironside is the killer, and he's hunting Lee Grant, and William Shatner is trying to save her, and it's set entirely in a hospital.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So kind of like Halloween 2, only with Michael Ironside instead of
Michael Myers.
Michael Myers. Yeah. And then finally, a really dopey movie called Megaforce.
I was waiting for this one to come
Which was a Hal Needham.
Yeah.
Hal Needham was a famed stuntman turned director. He went on to make like Smokey and the Bandit and one of my favorites, a BMX biking movie called Rad.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, he made this movie called Megaforce, which cost a fortune and is just terrible. I mean, it is rancid. It's horrible. And because of that, it's kind of, you can't help but kind of like enjoy it. There's a feature documentary that's in production right now.
Is there really?
About Megaforce, and it follows Barry Bostwick around.
Yeah, Barry Bostwick is like the lead, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a clip you may have seen from it if you're an 80s fan, because it's used in a lot of 80s media where Barry Bostwick, he's wearing this ridiculous outfit and he's got a headband on and he pops out of a tank, I think it is, and he's like, sometimes the good guys always win, even in the 80s.
Yeah,
and then he like kind of winks at the camera.
Yeah.
It's about I mean, it's hardly worth saying what it's about, but it's about like a secret, like G.I. Joe force that gets called in when the world's peace is at question. And
isn't it futuristic though, or is it not?
Yes, only in the sense that like,
oh, I guess it's set in the 80s though.
It is, but it's like they have super secret, like they have flying motorcycles.
Right,
Remember the whole scene where he flies on the motorcycle to catch the plane that left without him?
Yep.
Yeah, it is. It's really stupid. Yeah, it's
Even
also
in the
something you
80s.
want to watch with a fast forward button because there are stretches of it that are just mind-bogglingly tedious. So unless you're watching it with a bunch of friends and drinking, and so you can talk during those sequences, it can be a long watch.
Yeah.
But the stuff that is goofy is really, really fun. Maybe the best way to watch it is to go to YouTube and punch in something like the greatest hits of Megaforce or something. So you just get the choice bits. Speaking of choice bits, did you have any favorite scenes, what we call on our podcast, rewindable moments?
Yeah. Nice segue, by the way.
Thank you.
Well, I did. I had, many of the Grease 2 song and dance numbers. As you know,
that was the first thing on my list.
Yeah, Girl for All Seasons is one of my favorites, but I also love just the beginning, the Back to School, which I think really highlights how great it is to have a choreographer as a director, that Back to School number. What are your favorites?
Well, here's my top 3.
Okay.
Cool Rider.
Oh, yeah.
Michelle Pfeiffer and her ladder.
Cool Rider.
Back to School again. That's the opening number.
I love that. Yeah.
And Score Tonight, which is the bowling alley.
Yes, that's an
scene.
Amazing number. Yeah. Dancing with bowling balls. It's something to see.
Yeah.
And
what else do you have?
What else do I have? Well, surely there are some ET moments that would be rewindable. I don't know if you have some favorite ET moments.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff where they fly on the bikes is hard to beat. And I think the ending where he leaves and, the ship leaves a rainbow behind it.
Yeah.
And it cuts back to Elliot and the music swells and then it
you're
cuts
weeping
to black.
And
Yeah, it's the ending of ET is hard to beat.
Yep. Gosh, it's hard to pick something from Blade Runner. I love Blade Runner. It's a favorite, but there are definitely some rewindable moments for me in there. I don't know. I picked a few. I mean, any establishing shot, weirdly, to me is like, I just love looking at that.
Yeah, I just had Blade Runner / opening.
Yeah.
Just the setting of the world where you see the fire and the screens with the with the advertisements on them and the Coca-Cola.
I mean, it made sci-fi from that point on, I think. But I also really love that chase scene through the city. I can't remember the character, the woman who wears the see-through like raincoat, basically, when he chases her through the city. I think that's
Joanna Cassidy.
Joanna Cassidy, that's who it was. I love that scene. I think that's a really cool scene. You get to see a lot of the world in that too, and it's got a really cool look to it. And there's also always Rutger Hauer's
Tears in Rain
speech. And that fight with Daryl Hannah's character in that weird space.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Really, really cool. And brutal. I don't know. Anything else from Blade Runner?
No, that's what I had. Tears in Rain and the kind of opening establishment of the world.
Blade Runner, so good. The Thing also, I think, has some really good rewindable moments. When they're all suspicious of each other, that sort of suspicion scene.
Talking about the testing scene? Yeah, that's the scene that I had, the blood test.
Yeah.
Where they're all strapped to their chairs and they're testing their blood one by one. Yeah.
That's crazy. I don't know if you had anything else from The Thing or anything else.
Well, I mean, the whole movie's rewindable. But that scene, you're right. That scene's the one I always think of. Yeah.
Because that's the biggest thing about The Thing is the paranoia and suspicion everybody has of each other. Yeah. What anything from you on?
Yeah, I had a few. I had Rocky 3, like when Rocky trains with Apollo.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's
and
so
just,
good.
how important a character Apollo became and was to that franchise. In many ways, it was, Apollo Creed's story, that whole franchise, as well as Rocky's.
Yeah.
And it was just cool to see them training together finally.
I love that.
Becoming friends after being adversaries in the first two movies.
They're happy together, running down the beach. It's so lovely.
Yeah, it's borderline homoerotic.
But seeing male friendship in a movie is it's a really cool thing.
It's great. So, I had the scene in Poltergeist, which scared the bejesus out of me as a kid, which is when the tree reaches into the house and grabs the kid and pulls him down into the...
Definitely.
Yeah. That tree coming to life and grabbing that kid scared the hell out of me as a little kid. I used to see evil trees all over the place after that.
There's a lot of really good rewindable moments in Poltergeist.
Oh, yeah. Where the guy scrapes his face off after eating the chicken. I mean, there's there's a lot of really great stuff. And the last thing I had, and I can't believe you didn't mention this, was Hard Knock Life from Annie.
Oh, well, I had Annie dance numbers
and the climax of Annie, where she's climbing up the railroad bridge and she's rescued by Punjab. And
I kind of wanted to give that to you because I don't know, you're a big Annie fan too. But Hard Knock Life, of course.
Are you saying I'm a bigger Annie fan than you are?
I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
Let's call it a draw.
We'll call it a draw. I think that end scene, that's true. That's one of the best things where she's like climbing up that crazy railroad track and like there's helicopters. And,
Tim Curry's chasing her up the...
Yeah, that's really great. Actually, that's another one, Easy Street. These are things that I came to appreciate more as an adult. The stuff without Annie, the stuff with like...
Well, that's funny too, because when I was a kid, I had this on VHS and I would always fast forward through Easy Street. And now it's like one of my favorite parts.
I mean, it has some of our...
Because it's
comedic heavy
hitters.
It's
just Tim Curry, Bernadette Peters, and Carol Burnett knocking it out of the park.
I know. Yeah, I definitely appreciate that more now, for sure.
Anything else? I think that's a good that's a good thing to end on, perhaps.
Yeah.
A little Carol Burnett.
Always good to end on Carol Burnett. Pull that ear.
All right. We'll see you in the second half of 1982. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for being here. You've been listening to The Long Rewind. The program is produced by Dustin Morrow and hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli. If you enjoy the show, please consider hitting the subscribe button, leave us a good review on your podcast app, and tell your friends about the program. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.